He returned to the mansion he once called home, but what he saw froze his blood. His ex-wife, a baby in her arms, and secrets no one could survive. One truth could destroy everything. Will he uncover it, or will it destroy him first? The iron gates groaned as they opened, the sound slicing through the silence of the cold, mist-drenched night. Roman's car rolled down the long, forgotten driveway, its headlights cutting across the overgrown path lined with dead leaves and memories that refused to fade. The mansion stood at the end, enormous, haunting, and silent, like a ghost that never left. Rainwater still clung to its stone walls, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. The place once symbolized warmth, laughter, and love, but now it looked like a tomb built from broken promises. As Roman stepped out, the air hit him, a sharp, heavy gust that smelled of dust, old wood, and loneliness. His heart thudded against his chest, steady but cold, just like the man he had become. 9 months. 9 long months since she disappeared. Since Julia, his wife, the only woman who ever softened him, vanished without a single trace. He had burned empires searching for her, turned the underworld upside down, tortured informants until their silence broke. Yet he found nothing. Nothing but pain and sleepless nights. He reached the massive wooden doors, brushing his hand against the iron handle. His reflection in the glass looked foreign, a shadow of the man he used to be. The once dashing Mafia boss with confident eyes now looked hollow, haunted. He pushed the doors open, and the smell of decay rushed out, mixed with the faintest echo of her laughter that once filled these halls. The lights flickered weakly as if afraid to disturb the ghosts resting within. Every step he took down the marble corridor was like walking through the skeleton of a dream. The chandeliers hung low with cobwebs, the portraits of ancestors stared blankly at him, and the air carried a chilling stillness, the kind that makes you feel watched even when alone. His fingers grazed along the wall as if hoping to touch a piece of her, some lingering warmth left behind, but there was nothing, just the dust of lost time. He entered the grand hall, and his breath faltered. The fireplace stood dead, its ashes gray and untouched, yet beside it lay a small shawl, a woman's shawl, soft and familiar. Roman froze, his heartbeat quickening. His chest tightened as a flicker of movement caught his eye near the far corner of the room. At first he thought it was a trick of light, his mind replaying one of countless memories. But then he saw her. Julia. She was standing there, near the cold fireplace, her figure trembling slightly, her eyes wide and glossy in the dim glow. Her hair was shorter now, a few messy strands clinging to her tear-stained face. In her arms, she held a baby wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The world around Roman blurred. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The only sound he could hear was the frantic pounding of his own heart. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His vision wavered between disbelief and longing, his throat tightening until the name escaped in a whisper. Julia. It came out raw, almost broken, like it had been waiting inside him for a lifetime. Her grip around the baby tightened instantly. Fear flashed in her eyes. Not fear of him, but of something deeper, heavier, like a wound that never healed. Roman took one uncertain step forward, and the floorboards creaked under his weight. She flinched. That single movement shattered him more than any bullet could. The woman who once ran into his arms now trembled before him, like a fragile stranger. "It's really you," he murmured, his voice thick with pain. Every cell in his body screamed to hold her, to ask where she had gone, to demand why. But the sight of her tears silenced him. The air grew heavier, the fireless hearth glowing faintly from a single candle flickering beside her. Shadows danced on her face, highlighting faint bruises that peeked from beneath her collar. Roman's gaze hardened with confusion and heartbreak. Her beauty was still there, untouched by time, but there was something new, something broken behind her soft eyes. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a soft whimper. The sound pierced through the silence like a blade. Roman's attention snapped to the child, the tiny face, the blue blanket, the innocence untouched by the darkness surrounding them. His heart clenched painfully. "Julia," he whispered again, voice trembling now. "Whose child is that?" Julia's lips parted, but no words came out. Her throat quivered, her eyes filling with tears. The candlelight trembled along with her hands. For a long, breathless moment, neither spoke. Roman took another hesitant step closer, torn between fury and tenderness. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake her until she told him why she left. But the fragile way she held the baby stopped him. Her eyes darted to his face, then to the scars of pain that time had etched on it. Her own heart twisted, remembering the man who once swore to protect her from the world, even as that same world turned him into its monster. The silence between them felt eternal. Every second carried the weight of 9 months apart. 9 months of fear, of waiting, of wondering if the other still breathed. A faint crack of thunder rolled outside, echoing through the mansion, as if the heavens themselves were listening. Roman finally whispered, almost in disbelief, "Tell me it's not true. Tell me this isn't real." His voice broke halfway through, the tough exterior of the Mafia boss crumbling to reveal the shattered man beneath. Julia's tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she stared at him, her lips trembling, her arms tightening protectively around the baby. Roman's fists clenched by his sides, veins standing out as the storm inside him grew unbearable. He took another step forward, unable to restrain the anguish building in his chest. "Julia, why did you leave me?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy, inescapable, deadly. Her breathing quickened, as though every word she wanted to say was locked behind a wall of pain. The candle flickered again, and the light fell across her face, revealing faint scars along her wrist, thin, pale lines nearly hidden. Roman's eyes widened, his stomach twisting violently. His mind screamed to ask, but his voice failed him. His knees felt weak, as if the weight of everything, her disappearance, her silence, her sudden return, was crushing him from within. The room spun, and he reached out a trembling hand toward her. She hesitated, staring at his hand, then at his face, the face that haunted her nights, the man she had once loved beyond measure and feared beyond words. Time seemed to stretch as her lips parted at last. Her voice was faint, fragile, but it struck him harder than any gunshot ever could. "Roman," she whispered, her tone carrying both apology and love, pain and truth. He stepped closer, eyes burning with unshed tears. She swallowed hard, her next words barely audible over the sound of the rain starting again outside. "Roman, meet your son." The words shattered the world around him. His breath hitched, his heart stopped, and for a moment he forgot how to exist. His gaze dropped to the baby. Those soft, innocent features, the tiny hands that clutched the edge of the blanket. The child's eyes fluttered open for just a second, and Roman saw a reflection of himself. The same gray eyes, the same quiet intensity. A storm of emotions surged inside him. Disbelief, anger, guilt, awe, love, all clashing like thunder. His vision blurred, and the candlelight trembled as if the whole mansion held its breath. Outside, the thunder rolled again, louder this time, as though the universe knew what truth had just been spoken inside that broken home. Julia's tears fell silently onto the baby's blanket, her body shaking as she braced for whatever came next. Roman stood frozen, his world rewritten in an instant. He could no longer tell if this was a dream, a miracle, or punishment from a god he stopped believing in long ago. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, now felt alive again, but not with peace. It was alive with heartbreak, truth, and the first stirrings of something far deeper, something that neither of them could yet name. Roman's mind was still spinning from her words, "Meet your son." The echo of it filled the mansion, sinking into the walls, into his bones. He stared at the baby as if seeing a piece of his own soul return to him, but every question he'd buried came roaring back to life. Julia stood there trembling, her tears glimmering in the firelight, and for the first time he noticed the way her sleeves clung to her wrists. The fabric shifted slightly as she adjusted the baby, and something pale flashed beneath it. Faint marks, thin and uneven. His breath caught. He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a ghost he was afraid to touch. The scent of her hair reached him, faint lavender and salt. And for a second he almost forgot the storm raging inside him. But when she turned away, hiding her hands, the illusion broke. "Julia," he whispered, voice tight. "Look at me." She didn't move. His chest tightened. He reached out and gently caught her wrist. The sleeve slid back just an inch. The world seemed to stop. Faint scars glimmered under the dim light. Not fresh, not new, but old enough to speak of months of pain. Roman's throat closed. His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "Who did this to you?" Julia froze, her eyes closing as though the question itself hurt more than the scars. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, Roman. Not tonight." He shook his head slowly, anger mixing with fear. "No, Julia, you don't get to ask me to stop. Not after this." His words were sharp, but his voice cracked under the weight of them. "Tell me who did this." She held the baby tighter, as if shielding him from Roman's storm. "Roman, please! Tell me, damn it!" The shout burst from him before he could control it, echoing across the empty hall. The baby whimpered softly. The sound cut through Roman's rage like a blade. He looked at Julia, really looked, and saw her flinch, her body curling in on itself like a wounded bird. The sight destroyed him. He stepped back, guilt crashing over his anger. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to." "I know," she interrupted softly, her tears falling freely now. "I know you didn't." The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the baby's quiet breathing, the faint patter of new rain against the windows. Roman's gaze drifted to the scars again, to the faint bruise along her collarbone, and his heart twisted until he thought it might burst. "Julia, who did this to you?" he asked again, quieter this time. No anger, only fear. She stared into the fire, eyes distant as if searching for courage in the dancing flame. Her lips trembled. "If I tell you, you'll never forgive me," she whispered. He frowned. "Forgive you? Julia, someone hurt you. You think I'd blame you?" Her voice broke. "You don't understand. If I tell you, you'll lose everything you believe in." The words sent a chill down his spine. Lose everything? What could possibly destroy him more than he already was? "Try me," he said, his tone low and steady. She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw the terror behind her tears. "It wasn't a stranger," she said. "It was someone close, someone who knew exactly how to make it hurt without leaving too much to see." Roman's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Every muscle in his body screamed for vengeance. "Who?" Julia's breath hitched. She shook her head slowly, backing away a step. "Please, Roman, not now. You're not ready." "Not ready?" His voice trembled. "Julia, I spent 9 months searching for you, losing my mind, thinking you were dead. I deserve to know who did this." She stared at the floor. "And what will you do when you find out?" His silence was the answer. The air grew heavier, the candle by the fireplace flickering wildly, as if reacting to the tension between them. Roman's chest rose and fell rapidly, every heartbeat a drum of anger. "Who, Julia?" he repeated, softer but deadlier. Her eyes met his, full of resignation. "If I say his name," she whispered, "you'll go after him, and I can't lose you again." "You won't," he said, but even he didn't believe it. Julia closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. The baby shifted in her arms, sensing the weight of the moment. "You think you're strong enough to hear it?" she asked. "Stronger than you know," he said, stepping closer. She inhaled shakily, gathering what little courage she had left. "Roman." Her voice quivered. "It was your stepfather." The world stopped. For a second, Roman didn't move, didn't breathe. The rain outside grew louder, hammering against the windows like applause from hell itself. His ears rang, drowning out everything else. He stared at her, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. What did you just say?" Julia's shoulders sagged as though saying it had taken every ounce of her strength. "Leonardo," she whispered. "It was Leonardo." Roman stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. His mind rejected the words even as his heart screamed they were true. Leonardo? The man who raised him? The man who called him son when no one else would? The same man who taught him loyalty, power, control, and love? No, it couldn't be. His breath came in ragged bursts. "You're lying," he muttered, but the words felt hollow even as they left his lips. Julia shook her head slowly, tears streaming. "I wish I were." Roman turned away, pressing a trembling hand against the wall. The room seemed to spin around him. Every memory of Leonardo flashed through his mind. The lessons, the laughter, the pride in his eyes when Roman took over the business. None of it made sense anymore. Shadows danced on the wall as the candlelight flickered, and for the first time in years, Roman felt truly lost. He looked back at Julia, his voice raw. "Why? Why would he—" Julia interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "Because he wanted control, and he knew the only way to break you was through me." Roman's chest tightened painfully. He felt the burn of tears, but refused to let them fall. He wanted to scream, to destroy everything in sight, but all he could do was stare at the woman he loved and the son he never knew he had. The mansion around them seemed to close in, the air too thick to breathe. Julia's eyes met his again, frightened, apologetic, full of a sorrow no one should bear. He took a step forward, his hands trembling. "Julia, if this is true," his voice faltered, "I'll make him answer for it." Her eyes widened in fear. "Roman, no, that's what he wants. He'll pull you back into his darkness." Roman shook his head slowly. "Then I'll drag him out of it. I don't care what it costs." She reached out with her free hand, catching his arm. "Please, don't let hate consume you again." He stared down at her hand, small, scarred, trembling, and something in him softened, but only for a moment. The storm inside him was too strong to silence. Outside, lightning flashed, painting the walls in brief, violent bursts of white. Julia held their child tighter, whispering, "Don't go down that path again." Roman didn't answer. His eyes, once filled with pain, now burned with a new kind of fire, one that promised retribution. The name Leonardo echoed in his mind like a curse he could never unhear. The baby whimpered again, the sound fragile against the thunder. Roman turned his gaze to him, and for an instant his heart wavered. "I swear," he murmured, half to himself, half to Julia, "no one will ever hurt you again." But beneath that vow lingered something darker, the beginning of a storm neither of them could escape. Julia watched him, fear tightening in her chest as she saw the change in his eyes. The old Roman, the ruthless one, waking up again. She knew what that look meant. She had seen it before, and it had always ended in blood. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the old mansion, carrying away the last trace of peace they'd shared. Roman stood in silence, eyes still locked on Julia. The candle beside them flickered once more, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. And in that darkness, his voice came out low, trembling between heartbreak and fury. What did you just say?" Roman stood in the darkness, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and fury. The words, "Leonardo." It was Leonardo kept echoing in his skull, looping relentlessly like a broken record. Every memory he had of the man who raised him, who called him son, who taught him power and loyalty, now felt poisoned. The foundation of his world, his trust, his family, his empire, trembled as if caught in an earthquake. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears, each beat sinking with a mixture of rage and sorrow that seemed almost unbearable. Julia knelt before him, her body shaking, her tears soaking the baby's blanket. Her confession had been simple, yet its weight was suffocating. "He locked me away. I tried to run. I was pregnant with your child." Roman felt as though someone had ripped out his chest and replaced it with knives. He staggered backward, clutching the mantel for support. His vision blurred as memories of Leonardo flashed violently before his eyes. The man's soft voice when he taught Roman to handle the family business, the pride in his gaze whenever Roman succeeded, the rare moments of tenderness that had made him feel loved. Could it be true? Could this man, who had been his guiding light, really harbor such darkness? His thoughts collided violently, leaving him dizzy and raw. He dropped to his knees opposite Julia, trying to reconcile what he had heard with what he had believed. "No, it can't be," he whispered, almost to himself, voice breaking with disbelief. He can't." She shook her head, her tears sliding down her cheeks. The baby stirred slightly, sensing the tension in the room, and a soft cooing filled the otherwise suffocating silence. Roman's fists clenched tightly, white-knuckled as though gripping them could contain the storm inside him. "Julia, look at me," he demanded, his voice sharp but trembling. "You're telling me this for real?" She nodded, sobbing quietly, her hands shaking as she held their child closer. Every movement, every breath she took broke him further. Her confession hung in the air like an unbearable weight, and the room seemed to close in around him, walls pressing tighter with every heartbeat. Roman's mind raced uncontrollably, thoughts colliding in a chaotic spiral. Leonardo, the man who had been a father to him, a mentor, the architect of his life and empire, could never have committed such an act, or so he wanted to believe. And yet Julia's voice, trembling and raw, cut through the haze like a blade. "I was locked away, Roman. I couldn't escape. I tried." But her voice broke again, and she glanced at the baby before continuing. "I was pregnant with your child. I had no choice, no one to protect me." The weight of her words pierced him to the core, igniting a flame of anger, betrayal, and helplessness that consumed every rational thought. Roman's chest heaved as he fought to breathe, as if the air itself had thickened into chains around him. He wanted to scream, to shatter something, to make the world acknowledge the injustice done to her, to them. He rose abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. Each step reverberated against the hardwood floors, echoing through the mansion as though the walls themselves were bearing witness to his pain. The baby whimpered again, a soft, fragile sound, and Roman stopped mid-step, his gaze falling upon it. The innocence in that small face contrasted violently with the darkness that now surrounded them. How could anyone hurt Julia, the mother of his child? How could the man he trusted more than anyone in the world orchestrate such cruelty? The thought made him nauseous. His hands shook violently as he held his head, as if trying to physically block the truth from sinking in. Suddenly, his phone buzzed sharply on the mantelpiece, cutting through the storm of his thoughts. He froze, every muscle in his body tensing as he reached for it. The screen lit up with an encrypted message, brief and chilling. "Meet me at the old chapel if you want the truth." Roman's breath caught in his throat. The sender was unmistakable. Leonardo. His blood ran cold, the message a direct line to the very source of betrayal. His hands trembled as he read it again. The words almost surreal in their simplicity, yet terrifying in implication. It was a challenge, a confession, a trap. He couldn't tell which. The mansion seemed to shrink around him, walls pressing tighter, the shadows growing darker in the candlelight. Every instinct screamed that danger awaited, yet the fire inside him demanded the confrontation. Roman clenched his jaw, his teeth grinding, eyes burning with a mix of rage, disbelief, and unquenchable fire. "If it's true," he muttered under his breath, "he'll regret ever calling me son." His voice was low, but each word resonated like a gunshot in the silent mansion. Julia flinched slightly at the intensity, gripping the baby closer, her fear mingling with helplessness. She had seen that look before. The old Roman, the man who could destroy empires without a second thought, now awakened within him, fueled by personal betrayal. The air between them crackled with tension, each heartbeat magnified in the quiet room. Roman paced again, back and forth, each step heavy with deliberation, plotting and the burning need for answers. Every fiber of his being screamed to face Leonardo, to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything. He paused near the window, staring into the darkened night outside, where rain had begun again, dripping rhythmically from the eaves. The storm mirrored the one inside him, chaotic, relentless, unpredictable. His mind flashed to the countless nights he had spent searching for Julia, chasing shadows, interrogating men who knew nothing. He had imagined her gone, lost, perhaps dead, yet here she was, alive, carrying the proof of a bond he had never known, and the man who should have protected her, the man who had raised him, was the same one who had tormented her. The thought made his chest tighten painfully. He felt the urge to scream, but instead he sank into a tense silence, hands clenched, staring at the flickering candlelight. Each shadow seemed alive, mocking him, reminding him of the depth of betrayal. Julia watched him carefully, her eyes brimming with tears, her voice barely audible. "Roman, please don't let him break you." He didn't answer, not yet. Instead, he moved closer, drawn to her and the baby, as if both were anchors in a world that had suddenly tilted into chaos. He lowered himself beside her, his hand hovering near hers without touching, trembling with the weight of his emotions. The baby yawned, stretching tiny arms, innocent and unaware of the storm surrounding it. Roman's heart ached, torn between fury at Leonardo, anguish for Julia, and a desperate need to protect the child he had only just discovered. Every breath was heavy, every heartbeat amplified by the tension in the room. He wanted to act, to decide, to strike. But clarity had not yet returned. Only questions burned. What did Leonardo want? Why now? And how far had this gone? Minutes passed like hours, the candle sputtering low, shadows shifting with each gust of wind. Roman finally looked up, locking eyes with Julia. "You're sure it was him?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief and fury. She nodded, unable to speak further. The baby stirred again, cooing softly, grounding him for a fraction of a second in the reality of what mattered. Roman's gaze softened briefly toward the child, then hardened again as he thought of Leonardo, the man who had betrayed every ounce of trust, every lesson of loyalty. Rage bubbled up uncontrollably, and he gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw straining. "He's going to pay for this," he murmured, the words more threat than promise, a vow whispered to the shadows themselves. Julia's eyes widened, her fear palpable. She knew the path Roman was contemplating, a path of fire and vengeance, one he had walked before. Roman's hands shook as he grabbed his phone, rereading Leonardo's message. His mind raced with possibilities, plotting every angle, every outcome. The old chapel, a place from his childhood, filled with memories of sermons, lessons, quiet reflections, was now the stage for a confrontation that could unravel everything. His pulse pounded in his ears, every sense heightened, every nerve alert. He glanced at Julia and the baby one more time, committing the image to memory, knowing that no matter what happened, this moment would never leave him. He rose, towering over them, a mixture of fury and despair radiating from him. "I have to know," he said finally, voice low and deadly. "If he's involved, if it's true, I will make him regret every word, every moment he ever dared call me son." Julia whispered a prayer under her breath, clutching the baby closer. Roman's eyes hardened, scanning the mansion, feeling the weight of both betrayal and responsibility pressing down on him. Each shadow seemed alive, watching him, waiting. The storm outside intensified. Thunder rolling across the sky like a warning drum, lightning illuminating the tense lines of his face. He exhaled slowly, preparing himself, knowing the path ahead was fraught with danger, deception, and truths that might destroy him entirely. And yet, there was no turning back. The fire in his heart had ignited, and Roman would chase this truth to the very end, no matter the cost. Roman stepped into the dim, hallowed space of the old chapel, his every sense on fire, his mind a storm of anger and disbelief. The rain outside had turned into a torrential downpour, the sound of it pounding against the roof mingling with the thunder that shook the ground beneath him. Candlelight flickered along the cracked walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to dance and mock him as he advanced, each step measured, each breath tight with tension. The wooden pews, long abandoned and coated with dust, creaked under his weight as though warning him of the confrontation ahead. At the far end, by the altar, stood Leonardo, calm, composed, the epitome of control, his face an unreadable mask hiding intentions Roman could barely fathom. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating, and when he spoke, the sound of his voice sliced through the silence like ice. "So, she told you," Leonardo said softly, almost conversationally, yet each word carried a weight that pressed down on Roman's chest. Roman froze for a moment, studying his stepfather's expression, trying to read the man who had shaped his life. Every memory of Leonardo, guiding him, shaping him, teaching him the rules of power, now felt like a lie. Rage boiled beneath Roman's skin, threatening to explode. Every cell screaming at the betrayal. "Why, Dad?" he shouted, voice echoing off the chapel walls. "Why? She was my wife." The accusation tore out of him, raw and uncontrolled, bouncing around the empty hall. Leonardo's lips curved into a faint smirk, one that was not entirely human, one that carried the weight of cold calculation. "Because you were meant for power, not weakness," he said slowly, deliberately. "She was a distraction, and that child a threat to my legacy." The words hit Roman like bullets, his breath catching violently in his throat. He had known ambition and ruthlessness, but never had he imagined it directed against him in this way, against his family, against his life. The chapel seemed to constrict around him, the high ceiling pressing down, the air thick and heavy with tension. Roman's mind reeled as every thought collided with the next. The betrayal, the cruelty, the audacity. "You wanted my family gone, about to own me," he roared, stepping forward, fists clenched, every inch of his body vibrating with raw, unrestrained fury. His voice cracked as it echoed, reverberating off the stone walls, mingling with the sound of the storm outside. Leonardo's smirk widened faintly, almost amused by his son's anger, his cold eyes unwavering. "I made you, Roman," he said, reaching slowly into his coat, "and I can end you." In that moment, the air itself seemed to freeze, a taut string pulled to its limit, every shadow in the chapel watching silently, the storm outside a drumbeat of anticipation. Roman's pulse thundered in his ears, his vision narrowing on the man who had been his father, mentor, and now betrayer. Every instinct screamed danger, yet every muscle burned with the need to act, to strike, to reclaim what was stolen. The floor beneath his feet seemed to vibrate as he moved closer, careful, calculated, yet his body trembling from adrenaline and rage. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Leonardo's face in a stark, white light, revealing a flicker of the man beneath the mask, a flicker Roman could not yet interpret. "You're mad," Leonardo said calmly, almost taunting. "Mad enough to destroy yourself, to destroy everything you've built for a woman and a child who are yours only by accident." Roman's hands shook, but his eyes burned with a fire that refused to be quenched. The chapel echoed with the memory of his footsteps, the distant roll of thunder, the whispered prayers of the past that now seemed hollow and mocking. "I won't let you control me anymore," Roman spat, his voice a mix of venom and desperation. "I am my own man, and I protect what is mine." Leonardo raised his hand slowly, and a gun glinted under the dim candlelight, the metal cold, precise, a promise of death waiting. Every nerve in Roman's body screamed, every instinct screamed retreat, yet he rooted himself to the spot, fury and disbelief fueling him. The air between them was taut, electric, each breath a countdown, each heartbeat a drum. Roman's mind raced, recalling every moment of his life shaped by Leonardo. Every lesson, every word, every smile that now felt poisoned. His heart thudded violently in his chest as he stared at the gun, at the man who had once called him son, at the betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. "You raised me," Roman said through gritted teeth, voice shaking, "only to destroy what I love, to take from me the one thing that mattered." Leonardo's expression didn't waver. "You were always meant to rule, Roman," he said, voice cold and absolute. "Emotions, attachments, they make men weak. You were meant for power, and power requires sacrifice." Roman's jaw tightened, his knuckles white, his pulse a drum of fury and impending violence. He could feel the rage building, a storm within him, threatening to spill over, to consume the chapel, the man before him, the world around him. Every shadow on the walls seemed alive, watching, waiting for the inevitable clash. The baby's cries echoed faintly in his memory, a fragile reminder of what was truly at stake. He clenched his fists, every muscle taut, ready to strike, ready to defend, ready to destroy. "You will not touch them," he said, his voice low, deadly, carrying the weight of all his pain, betrayal, and love. Leonardo's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, cold, precise. He raised the gun fully now, a predator measuring his prey. The silence was absolute, only the distant storm outside keeping time with the tension in the room. Roman's heart hammered against his ribs, sweat beading along his forehead. Every memory, every lesson, every betrayal converged in this single moment, each second stretching into eternity. His mind was a battlefield. Each thought a soldier fighting against the impossible truth of the man standing before him. Lightning struck again outside, illuminating the chapel in violent white light, casting shadows that leapt across the walls like specters. Roman's hand twitched toward his own concealed weapon, but his eyes never left Leonardo, never wavered. The storm outside mirrored the one within him, a perfect reflection of chaos and fury. Every breath was measured, every heartbeat amplified. The gun in Leonardo's hand seemed impossibly heavy, weighted with the history between them, the blood that could be spilled, the trust shattered. Roman stepped forward, slow, deliberate, eyes locked on Leonardo. "I am not your pawn," he said, voice low, full of authority and rage. "I am my own man, and if you touch them, I will end you." The tension in the room was unbearable, a taut wire threatening to snap. Every muscle in Roman's body screamed with readiness, every sense heightened, each second an eternity. Leonardo's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of calculation, the weight of Roman's words pressing against him like an invisible force. Then, the world exploded into a single, deafening sound. A gunshot rang out, echoing through the chapel, ricocheting off the stone walls, shaking the very foundation. The force of it threw Roman backward slightly, the shockwave rattling his bones, adrenaline spiking uncontrollably. Candle flames danced wildly, shadows jumping in chaotic frenzy. Dust fell from the ceiling, settling like ash in the tense, charged air. Roman's heart hammered, ears ringing, vision narrowing to the man across from him. His father, his creator, his betrayer, and the gun still smoking in his hand. The air seemed to pause, heavy with anticipation, every shadow frozen, every heartbeat waiting for the next move. Roman's body surged forward instinctively, every instinct screaming, every thought aligned with one goal: protect, retaliate, survive. Leonardo's eyes were unreadable, a mask of calm over the underlying tension, but Roman could sense the calculation, the danger, the threat of more betrayal. Each breath he took was shallow, measured, dangerous. The chapel, once a place of sanctity, had become a battlefield of trust and blood, of father and son, of love and hate intertwined in a deadly dance. Roman's pulse raced, thoughts firing in rapid succession. How to end this, how to protect, how to survive, how to confront the man who had been both father and enemy. The echoes of the gunshot lingered in the air, the silence afterward more terrifying than the sound itself. Every shadow seemed to move with intent, the storm outside pounding like the drumbeat of fate. He crouched slightly, preparing to advance, the fire in his eyes reflecting the candlelight, the storm, the rage. Leonardo's voice cut through the ringing in Roman's ears, calm and deliberate. "Do you understand now, Roman? Power is everything. Love, loyalty, family. They are all distractions. They make men weak. You were always meant to choose strength." Roman's fists clenched further, teeth grinding, mind calculating, heart raging. "No," he spat, venom dripping from his words. "You're wrong. Power without love is empty. Strength without loyalty is meaningless. And I protect what is mine. Do you hear me?" The chapel seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow, every stone, every beam of candlelight bore witness. The storm outside screamed in agreement with the tension inside. Roman's muscles coiled like a predator's, ready to strike, ready to defend, ready to destroy. Leonardo's finger remained on the trigger, each second an eternity, each heartbeat a countdown. The history between them, the love, the betrayal, the family. It all collided in the charged air, electric and dangerous. And in that moment, with the gun between them and the storm raging outside, Roman knew nothing would ever be the same. Bloodlines had been betrayed, and the consequences of this single act, a father against a son, would echo far beyond the walls of the old chapel. The gunshot had been fired, but the war between them had only begun. The deafening sound of the gunshot still reverberated in Roman's ears, mingling with the storm raging outside, when the sharp, searing pain tore through his arm. He staggered back, his body slamming against a stone pillar, the impact reverberating through his bones. Every nerve screamed in agony, fire coursing through his veins as crimson bloomed across his sleeve. But the pain in his body, as intense as it was, paled in comparison to the storm raging inside his chest. His heart throbbed violently, a chaotic rhythm fueled by betrayal, love, and rage. He glared across the chapel at Leonardo, who now wavered slightly, a shadow of mortality crossing his otherwise composed demeanor. Roman's breath came in short, ragged bursts, each inhale a fight against the overwhelming tide of fury and disbelief. Instinct took over before thought could catch up. His other hand reached for the weapon he had concealed, and the moment his fingers gripped it, he squeezed the trigger. A deafening crack split the air, the echo bouncing off the chapel walls like thunder. Time seemed to slow, stretching each heartbeat into eternity. Roman's eyes tracked the trajectory of the bullet, his gaze locking on Leonardo, who staggered backward, clutching his chest. Blood seeped through his fingers, stark against the dark fabric of his suit, and the man who had always seemed invincible now trembled like a fragile statue, wobbling at the altar. Roman's knees felt weak, his stomach twisted, but he forced himself forward, adrenaline carrying him over every ounce of pain. He ran to Leonardo, each step pounding against the marble floor. The sound mixing with the wind and rain battering the chapel windows. Every memory of the man flashed through his mind. The fatherly lessons, the mentorship, the rare smiles and moments of pride, colliding violently with the present, where the same man now lay bleeding and vulnerable before him. "Dad!" Roman shouted, voice breaking with emotion, anguish spilling into every syllable. "Why? Why did it come to this? I would have given everything for you. Everything!" Tears stung his eyes, blurring the scene into a haze of pain, fire, and blood. He reached out, grabbing Leonardo's arm, feeling the tremor of life leaving him, the warmth fading into icy stillness. Leonardo's gaze, once sharp and commanding, softened, and for a moment the power dynamic of their relationship shifted. Tears pooled in his eyes, the pride and regret mingling with the fading spark of life. "Because power was all I ever knew," he whispered, his voice fragile, almost childlike in its honesty. Every word struck Roman like a hammer, reverberating through his bones and shaking the very core of his being. The man who had taught him loyalty, ruthlessness, and control now confessed that everything had been shaped by the hunger for power alone, that love had never guided him. Roman's hands shook violently, blood from his own wound dripping onto the floor, mixing with Leonardo's, painting the ground with the bitter symphony of family, betrayal, and mortality. Time slowed to an unbearable crawl as Leonardo's hand slipped from Roman's grip, falling lifelessly against the marble floor. Roman felt the world tilt violently, the air thickening around him, the storm outside intensifying in perfect reflection of the chaos within. He sank to his knees, unable to comprehend the duality of what had just happened. The man who raised him, destroyed him, shaped him, and betrayed him now lay gone, the warmth of life draining away under his hands. He shook, tears flowing freely, sobs racking his chest as he clutched the man who was both father and enemy. Every heartbeat seemed painfully loud in his ears, each one echoing the tragedy of this irrevocable moment. The chapel, once silent, now felt suffocating. The candle flames flickered violently, shadows leaping across the walls, as if the building itself recoiled from the carnage. Roman's vision narrowed, his world reduced to the blood-soaked figure of Leonardo, and the gaping emptiness of loss pressing down upon him. He pressed his forehead against the man's chest, feeling the shallow warmth that quickly faded, imprinting the finality of death into his memory. I trusted you," Roman whispered, voice raw and broken. The words dissolved into sobs, unanswered, drifting through the chapel like ghosts of the past. The sound of the door creaking made him flinch. Roman's head snapped up, eyes scanning the shadows, every muscle taut and ready. Through the dim light, a figure appeared in the doorway. Julia. She stood frozen, trembling, her hand clutching the baby tightly against her chest. Her eyes, wide and glimmering with tears, locked onto Roman and then onto the blood covering him. The sight of her, delicate and terrified, holding the fragile life they had brought into the world, intensified the ache in his chest. Roman's gaze softened briefly, but the anguish and rage simmering within him remained, raw and consuming. The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos inside the chapel, rain hammering against the roof, lightning illuminating fleeting glimpses of their tortured expressions. Roman's chest heaved violently as he rose slightly, still kneeling beside Leonardo's lifeless body, his hands stained with blood. The juxtaposition of the child's innocence against the destruction surrounding them was unbearable. He wanted to scream, to break, to collapse under the weight of grief, but the sight of Julia, trembling, clutching their child, anchored him, demanding a strength he was unsure he had left. Julia's voice quivered as she finally stepped forward, small and tentative. "Roman, are you okay?" she asked, words barely above a whisper, trembling with fear. The baby stirred, sensing the tension in the room, a soft whimper escaping its lips. Roman's eyes softened momentarily at the sound, a mix of love, responsibility, and desperation crashing over him. Yet the fire within him remained, burning with vengeance, with grief, with disbelief. He forced himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his arm, every muscle taut, every nerve screaming as he turned toward her. The reality of what had just occurred, the death of Leonardo, the loss of a man who was both father and tormentor, pressed on him like a weight threatening to crush him. Roman's lips trembled, not with words, but with the enormity of the emotions coursing through him: anger, betrayal, sorrow, and a raw, aching love that refused to let go. He took a slow, shuddering breath, finally addressing the silence of the chapel. "Julia, it's over," he said softly, though the word felt hollow against the magnitude of the moment. He glanced down at the baby, eyes full of fierce protection and tenderness, and then back to her. Julia's hand trembled as she rested it on his blood-stained arm, her tears streaking down her cheeks. The baby yawned, tiny hands clenching briefly, unaware of the chaos surrounding it. Roman's mind flickered between the man who raised him, now gone, and the life he had just discovered. His son, innocent and fragile, carrying the legacy that Leonardo had sought to destroy. The juxtaposition drove a sharp ache through his chest, his fists clenched, jaw tight, heart burning with the need to protect, to avenge, to survive. Every breath was deliberate, every heartbeat a reminder of the fragility of life and the cost of betrayal. Outside, the storm raged louder, rain lashing against the stained glass windows in violent sheets. The wind howled through the open doors, scattering debris across the floor, echoing the tumult within Roman. He stepped fully into the center of the chapel, bloodied and trembling, eyes scanning every shadow for threats, for answers, for some semblance of resolution. The baby stirred again, cooing softly, and Roman's gaze softened, a flicker of warmth piercing the storm of grief. He took a careful step toward Julia, who remained at the doorway holding their child like a fragile treasure. Roman's voice, low and ragged, broke the silence. "I will protect them," he murmured, the words both promise and vow. His hand, slick with blood, brushed briefly over Julia's as he closed the distance between them. She looked up at him, eyes wide, tears glistening like diamonds in the dim candlelight, and he felt the weight of their shared trauma, their shared love, and the unspoken question of how to survive the aftermath. The chapel, soaked in shadows and blood, seemed to breathe around them, echoing the enormity of the events that had just unfolded. Lightning flashed, illuminating the faces of father and son, of man and child, of the shattered remnants of family. Roman's eyes burned with emotion, reflecting a storm that matched the one outside. Fury, grief, protection, and vengeance all intertwined. Julia finally took a step forward, hesitant but resolute, bringing the baby into the circle of their fragile safety. Roman knelt slightly, adjusting the baby in his arms, the warmth of life against the cold reality of death, anchoring him in the present. He swallowed hard, his chest heaving, mind racing with the knowledge that nothing would ever be simple again. The wind howled as the chapel doors slammed, scattering candlelight across the walls. Roman's eyes scanned the shadows one final time, each flicker of movement a potential threat, each echo a memory of betrayal. He looked down at Leonardo, lifeless on the cold floor, and then back at Julia and the child. His voice was low, trembling between rage and heartbreak. "We survive," he whispered. "No matter what it takes, we survive." And as he spoke, he felt a flicker of determination, a spark of the man he had always been, ruthless, protective, unstoppable. The storm outside raged on, but inside the chapel, amidst blood and sorrow, Roman's resolve was ignited. Roman turned slowly toward Julia, his vision blurred from the mixture of rain, blood, and tears. His chest heaved violently, each breath a sharp reminder of the wound in his arm and the chaos surrounding them. The storm outside still roared like a wild animal, slamming against the shattered windows of the chapel, rattling the walls as if warning them of the danger yet to come. Roman's hand trembled slightly as he reached for hers, gripping tightly, feeling her small, quivering fingers entwine with his. "He's gone. It's over," he whispered, voice hoarse, shaking, desperate to convince himself as much as her. His words hung in the air, fragile against the darkness and the storm, almost swallowed by the howling wind. Julia's eyes were wide, filled with terror that mirrored the shadows dancing around them. She shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks, glistening in the dim light of the candles that remained lit after the chaos. "No, Roman, it's never over," she whispered, her voice fragile but urgent. The fear in her gaze was palpable, wrapping around Roman's chest like a vice. "His men will come for us," she added, the words heavy, dripping with the weight of the inevitable. In that moment, the reality of the empire Leonardo had built and the reach of his cruelty crashed over them like a wave. Roman's heart tightened in his chest, a mix of fury, fear, and raw determination igniting within him. The distant echo of gunfire cut through the night, sharp and alarming. Roman froze for a heartbeat, listening, counting, calculating. Each gunshot carried the invisible stamp of Leonardo's empire, a warning, a reminder that the fight was far from over. Rain slicked the floors of the chapel, soaking Roman's shoes, pooling in rivulets along the cracked stone. He pressed his lips together, swallowing back pain, blood, and emotion, focusing only on the path forward. His hands shook as he reached for Julia's again. "Then we run, to the mansion," he said firmly, determination settling into his bones like steel. Julia nodded quickly, clutching their son closer to her chest, wrapping him in the soft blanket that protected him from the storm. The baby's small hands flexed against her, tiny fingers curling instinctively. Roman's heart clenched at the sight. Fragile life, innocent, vulnerable, and entirely dependent on him. He guided Julia toward the chapel's exit, careful of the debris scattered across the floor from the earlier struggle. Each step was tense, silent, measured. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to scream, echoing their vulnerability. The storm outside had not relented. Rain pelting down in sheets, the wind slicing across their faces like 1,000 invisible knives. As they emerged into the torrential night, headlights flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating the drenched figures of father, mother, and child. Roman's hand instinctively went to his arm, now sticky with blood, but he ignored it, letting adrenaline override the pain. The distant sound of engines and shouts confirmed that Leonardo's men were already scouring the city, tracking them down with precision and malice. Rain soaked Roman's hair and ran down his face in rivulets, but he paid no attention, focused entirely on keeping Julia and the baby safe. He grabbed her hand tightly, pulling her forward through the mud and chaos, their movements synchronized, silent yet urgent. The mansion, once a place of memory and solitude, loomed ahead through the sheets of rain. Its familiar silhouette offered both hope and dread, safety for the moment, but a reminder of what had been lost and what might yet come. Roman's breaths came fast, each inhale sharp with urgency, each exhale a struggle against the storm, the blood, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. Julia stumbled slightly, and he caught her arm, steadying her, eyes scanning the shadows for threats, ears straining for the slightest hint of pursuit. Their son whimpered softly, sensing the tension in the air, a fragile, innocent alarm that cut Roman to the core. Once inside the mansion, Roman acted quickly, moving instinctively as he barricaded the door with the heavy furniture that remained. Each creak of wood against wood echoed through the silent halls, punctuated by the occasional crash of rain against broken windows. The familiar smell of aged wood and dust filled the air, a stark contrast to the blood and adrenaline that clung to him. Julia stepped closer, and Roman's vision softened slightly as she handed him their son. He cradled the child gently, feeling the tiny heartbeat against his chest, warm and fragile, and for a moment the storm in his mind and body stilled. Tears ran silently down Roman's face as he pressed his lips to the soft, smooth skin of his son's forehead. "He's mine," he whispered, voice trembling, full of raw emotion, promise, and protection. Each word carried weight, carrying the vow of a father determined to shield the life before him at any cost. Julia nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now, pooling in her hair, wetting the collar of her coat. "Our son, Roman," she said softly, her voice breaking the fragile peace of the moment, a bittersweet acknowledgement of what they had survived and what was yet to come. The mansion seemed to breathe around them, echoing the distant thunder, the wind rattling the cracked windows and the faint creak of its old timbers. Roman moved carefully through the halls, alert, tense, every sense on high. He pressed his back against the wall, listening to the rain, the wind, the distant noise of the city, and the silent threat of enemies he could not see. Each heartbeat reminded him that Leonardo's reach was vast, that danger had only been delayed, not ended. The mansion, their temporary sanctuary, was a cage as much as it was a refuge, filled with shadows and memories, the past pressing in from every corner. As Roman settled in a safe corner, still cradling the baby, Julia moved beside him, holding him by the arm, her own gaze scanning the darkened windows. The child stirred, tiny whimpers escaping, and Roman's lips curved into a small, protective smile. "You're safe now," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. But the promise carried forward into the night like a quiet fire. Every shadow outside seemed alive, every sound amplified, and Roman's mind raced with plans, strategies, and the certainty that their lives had irrevocably changed. The sudden crackle of a speaker broke the fragile calm, a voice low, gravelly, and unmistakably threatening, echoing through the mansion's halls. "Roman, you can't hide from your father's empire," it growled, reverberating through the walls, a sinister reminder that the battle was far from over. Roman's heart lurched, his grip on the child tightening, his jaw set with renewed determination. The words were meant to intimidate, to unnerve, but instead they ignited a new flame in him, a fire that promised he would not run, that he would face whatever was coming with ferocity, cunning, and the unyielding protection of his family. Lightning illuminated the room briefly, casting violent shadows across the walls, painting Roman's face in stark relief, a man torn, battered, but unbroken. Julia clutched his arm, her fingers trembling, her fear mirrored in his eyes, yet behind that fear lay trust, love, and the silent promise that together they would survive. Roman's gaze flicked from the darkened hallway to the glowing eyes of the city beyond the broken windows, calculating, preparing, vowing silently that no force, no empire, no shadow of Leonardo would take from him again. The storm outside intensified, the rain hammering against the walls and windows like a drumbeat of war. But inside the mansion, Roman's focus narrowed, heart steadying, mind sharpening. He adjusted the baby in his arms, soft, fragile life against the weight of chaos and death, and felt an almost sacred sense of responsibility settle over him. Every shadow in the mansion seemed alive, every sound amplified, and yet, amid the fear, the pain, and the exhaustion, Roman's resolve hardened. The empire that had sought to destroy him, that had tried to take from him what was most precious, would find no victory here. And as the speaker crackled again, a faint mechanical whir accompanying the sinister growl, Roman pressed his back against the wall, arm bleeding, chest heaving. Eyes burning with intensity, the mansion, the storm, the night, all became secondary to the fierce, unbreakable truth pulsing in his veins. His son, his family, his love would survive, and he would face the empire, every shadow, every echo, every threat, with the fire of vengeance and the armor of unwavering protection. The night was far from over, but Roman, drenched, bloodied, and unbroken, would not falter. The mansion was quiet now, but the silence carried a weight heavier than any storm. The echoes of violence, the scent of blood, the remnants of fear. They lingered in every corner, whispering of dangers past and those yet to come. Days had passed since the night they fled the chapel, days during which Roman and Julia barely spoke, communicating through small gestures, glances, and the soft coos of their child. Roman's arm, once a searing wound of blood and fire, had begun to mend, the flesh knitting together, though the ache in his heart, the scar of betrayal and loss, was far slower to heal. He moved carefully through the halls, each step deliberate, eyes scanning shadows that might not even exist. Yet with every glance at Julia and the baby, his chest lightened slightly, a fragile glimmer of hope pushing back against the lingering darkness. Julia had taken it upon herself to care for him, though she too bore the scars of the night, emotional, invisible, but no less deep. She moved softly through the mansion, her presence a balm to Roman's jagged soul. She cleaned his wounds, whispered small words of encouragement, and sometimes, when the baby was asleep, she would allow herself a smile, a sound, a flicker of laughter that pierced through the gloom. It was a sound Roman hadn't realized he'd been craving, a tether to life outside the chaos that had consumed them. He watched her sometimes from across the room, the soft glow of candlelight caressing her face, illuminating the delicate curve of her cheek, the determination in her eyes, and the infinite care she poured into their child. One night, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the world outside, glistening and drenched in the silver glow of dawn. Roman sat in the old armchair, still tired, still bloodied, but with a measure of peace settling around him like a protective cloak. Julia sat opposite him on the worn couch, cradling their baby in her arms, humming softly a lullaby that had no name but spoke volumes in its gentle melody. The baby stirred, stretching tiny limbs and curling into Julia's chest, and Roman felt something inside him uncoil, a knot of fear and rage loosening just enough to allow a flicker of hope. His voice, low and raw, broke the stillness. "I failed you once," he whispered, eyes locked on Julia, "but never again." Julia looked up from the baby, her hand reaching across the space between them to rest against his cheek. Her touch was gentle, careful, like she feared the fragility of the moment might shatter if handled too roughly. Tears glimmered in her eyes, yet her lips curved in a small, tender smile. "You didn't fail me, Roman," she said softly, voice breaking in places where the emotion was too strong to contain. "You came back." her words wrapped around him, warmer than the fire in the hearth, more powerful than the rage he had once felt. Roman leaned forward, pressing his lips to her hand. Tasting the salt of her tears, feeling the warmth of life that had survived against every expectation, every threat. For a brief, precious moment he felt whole again, as though the world outside could vanish entirely and nothing else would matter. But the mansion had other plans. The shadows that clung to the corners shifted slightly, as if watching, listening, waiting. Roman's senses, honed by years of navigating danger and betrayal, were never at rest. He noticed the subtle movements of curtains in the breeze from cracked windows, the faint creaks of the floorboards settling under their own age, and the soft flutter of the baby's blanket. Even in peace, the air carried tension, the whisper of a world that refused to forget the violence they had endured. Yet for now, it was calm. An uneasy calm, fragile as spun glass, but precious nonetheless. Roman's eyes lingered on Julia as she leaned back into the couch, the baby resting against her shoulder, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. He felt a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months, a softness that contrasted sharply with the fire of vengeance still smoldering beneath his skin. Every scar he bore, every wound he had received and inflicted, seemed to pulse in rhythm with the quiet life in front of him. He reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of damp hair from Julia's face, his fingers trembling slightly. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes, her lips curling into a faint, contented smile. They sat like that for hours, watching the pale light of dawn seep through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Roman's thoughts wandered briefly, unable to resist, to the empire Leonardo had left behind, to the men who still hunted them, to the darkness lurking beyond the safety of these walls. But every time the thought surfaced, he glanced at Julia, at the baby, and the weight in his chest lightened just enough to remind him of why he fought, why he survived. The baby stirred once, tiny hands stretching, and Roman adjusted him gently, whispering soft promises he wasn't sure he believed he could keep. "I will protect you," he murmured, voice hoarse, "from everything, from the world, from him, from anyone who tries to take what's ours." Julia's hand found his, squeezing lightly, a grounding presence amid the storm of his mind. She placed a soft kiss on his knuckles, then whispered, "You've already protected us, Roman. You came back, and that's what matters." Hours passed, time slipping like sand through fingers, the mansion quiet except for the occasional creak or the soft breathing of the baby. Roman and Julia moved with a rhythm that had been forged in survival, a dance of care and protection, punctuated by soft laughter that occasionally escaped her lips. It was fragile, it was fleeting, but it was real. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Roman allowed himself to believe that perhaps they could endure. Yet even in this fragile sanctuary, the shadows never fully receded. Roman noticed them lingering along the edges of the room, flickering just beyond his peripheral vision, whispering reminders of what they had lost, what they could still lose. He tightened his hold on Julia's hand, the baby still cradled against his chest, and whispered a vow, low but ferocious. "No one will take you from me again. No one." The words carried through the quiet mansion, mingling with the distant sounds of the waking city beyond, fragile yet unwavering. As he leaned closer to kiss Julia, brushing the hair from her face once more, the mansion's silence shattered with a sudden, jarring knock at the door. It was sharp, deliberate, and entirely unexpected, the sound cutting through the fragile cocoon of peace they had built. Roman's breath hitched, the baby stirring at the disturbance, sensing the tension that had returned. Julia's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her features. Roman's heart pounded violently, blood still warm on his arm, adrenaline surging anew. The storm outside had passed, The world outside the mansion's walls seemed calm, yet in that moment, danger had returned with a single, deliberate rap echoing through the halls. He rose slowly, every muscle tense, eyes scanning the doorway, fingers brushing instinctively over the gun concealed beneath his coat. The baby whimpered softly, and Roman adjusted him in his arms, pressing him close, a shield against the unknown. Julia moved closer, hand on his arm, grounding him, but even her presence could not erase the prickling of fear crawling along his spine. Every instinct screamed that they were no longer safe, that the peace they had tasted was only temporary. Roman's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing at the door, as he whispered under his breath, voice low and dangerous, "Who's there?" The mansion seemed to hold its breath along with him, the soft creaks of floorboards and the distant chirp of early morning birds clashing with the silent tension hanging in the air. Another knock came, softer, more deliberate, yet unmistakably human. Roman's gaze flicked to Julia, then back to the door, calculating, anticipating, preparing. The baby shifted against his chest, tiny fingers curling into his shirt, sensing the pulse of danger through him. Roman tightened his grip, whispering assurances he wasn't even certain he could keep. "It's okay. We're safe. For now." Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last, echoing through the mansion's empty halls, the once familiar rooms now filled with the weight of vigilance. Roman stepped closer to the door, each footfall deliberate, careful not to startle Julia or the child. His arm throbbed, the healing wound a constant reminder of the night that had changed everything. Yet despite the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, a fire burned within him, the same fire that had driven him to fight, to survive, to protect. He would not fail them again. The knock came once more, insistent and deliberate. Roman's hand hovered over the handle, every nerve on edge, senses heightened to a razor's edge. Julia pressed close, her eyes wide with worry, lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The baby stirred again, whimpering softly, and Roman adjusted him in his arms, whispering a quiet promise only they could hear. "I've got you. I won't let anyone take you." The mansion seemed to hold its breath with him, the morning light streaming faintly through the windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air like suspended diamonds. Shadows clung to every corner, hinting at memories, past threats, and dangers yet unseen. Roman's gaze hardened, jaw set, eyes sharp. The knock had shattered their fragile sanctuary, and he knew instinctively that this was only the beginning, the first ripple of the storm that would test their survival, their love, and the strength of the bond forged in blood and shadow. As the knocking persisted, Roman took a slow, deliberate breath, centering himself, drawing the child closer, feeling Julia's hand rest on his arm. He whispered softly, voice a mixture of warning and promise, "Whoever it is, they're going to regret waking us." Lightning flashed briefly outside, illuminating his determined face, and for the first time in days, the mansion seemed alive, a place of danger, of love, and of defiance. The storm may have passed outside, but within, the true battle was only beginning. 8. Roman's body remained rigid, gun raised, muscles coiled like springs. Every sense alert and strained. The knocking had stopped, leaving only the tense silence of the mansion, thick and heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. His eyes darted toward the door, every shadow seeming alive, whispering danger, hinting at movement beyond his vision. Julia's hand rested lightly on his arm, offering reassurance, grounding him, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the battle raging within. Each passing second stretched into an eternity, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the stillness. Roman's grip tightened on the gun, fingers white against the metal, knuckles aching from anticipation. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. The sound sliced through the room, sharp and deliberate, and Roman froze, muscles taut, eyes narrowing, ready for any threat. Yet what lay beyond the threshold was not an enemy, not a figure cloaked in shadow, not the flash of a weapon. It was something different, something unexpected. A single envelope, elegant and imposing, had been slid carefully under the door, resting against the wooden floor like a quiet declaration. Roman's chest tightened, adrenaline still coursing through his veins, mind racing to anticipate the meaning behind this unspoken message. He bent slightly, knee brushing the damp floor, and reached for the envelope, hands trembling despite the control he had fought to maintain. The seal was unmistakable, red wax pressed with the imprint of his father's crest, a symbol of power, control, and the legacy of blood that had defined his life for so long. Roman's fingers lingered on the wax, brushing its ridges, feeling the weight of everything it represented: betrayal, love, manipulation, and the inescapable ties that bound him to Leonardo even now. He inhaled sharply, a slow, deliberate breath, and broke the seal, careful, reverent, and wary all at once. Inside, nestled on delicate parchment, lay a key, glinting faintly in the dim light of the mansion, and a note written in a hand that carried authority, command, and the faintest trace of paternal affection. Roman's eyes flickered across the words, reading them slowly, as if savoring each syllable. For your son, not for revenge, but for redemption. The simplicity of the phrase struck him like lightning. Redemption. Not power, not vengeance, not control, redemption. Roman's chest tightened, a complex tangle of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Disbelief, relief, sorrow, and hope all at once. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, blurring the edges of the key, the note, the room itself. He lowered the gun slowly, almost reluctantly, as though releasing the weapon symbolized a surrender he had been unwilling to give. Julia stepped closer, pressing her forehead against his shoulder, silent, strong, and grounding. Her warmth radiated into him, and for the first time in months, Roman felt something resembling peace. Delicate, fragile, but undeniably real. "Let it end here, Roman," she whispered, voice steady despite the tears brimming in her eyes. Roman nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, allowing the tension in his shoulders to ease fractionally. He glanced down at the baby in the cradle, fragile life nestled in soft blankets, unaware of the storms that had raged for his existence. With care born of a father who had survived too much and loved too fiercely, Roman lifted the golden key from the envelope, feeling its cold weight against his palm, a symbol of something larger than them all. He knelt slowly, placing the key in the cradle beside his child, fingers lingering as if imprinting protection and promise onto the fragile moment. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling instinctively, brushing against the key as though recognizing its significance, the first conscious action of a life that had already weathered storms before it began. Roman watched, heart swelling with a mixture of pride, love, and the bitter memory of what had come before. The legacy of his father's empire, of blood and betrayal, now met something new: innocence, hope, and the faint glimmer of redemption. He pressed a gentle kiss to Julia's forehead, soft, reverent, and full of emotion that words could never fully capture. "No more wars, only love," he whispered, voice shaking low, yet unwavering. Outside, the mansion remained quiet, the storm long gone, yet the air carried a residual tension, a faint echo of what had been and what might yet come. Roman's eyes lingered on the cradle, watching the tiny chest rise and fall, the delicate hand flexing against the golden key. A single tear rolled down his cheek, catching the light of the early sun filtering through broken windows, glinting like a jewel in the quiet room. Julia's hand found his, squeezing lightly, grounding him, reminding him that the past, though powerful, no longer had dominion over their lives. Roman rose slowly, holding the baby gently against his chest, eyes scanning the empty halls of the mansion that had once been a battlefield, a prison, a place of secrets, and now, finally, a sanctuary, however temporary. He moved with care, each step measured, every shadow accounted for, but the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The golden key, now resting in the cradle, seemed almost to radiate its own quiet power, a symbol of the possibility of a future built not on fear, not on vengeance, but on protection, family, and love. The baby stirred again, tiny coos filling the quiet room, and Roman smiled softly, brushing a damp strand of hair from Julia's face. Her eyes met his, filled with emotion too vast for words, a mix of relief, gratitude, love, and cautious hope. Roman's lips found hers in a slow, lingering kiss, gentle yet burning with the intensity of all they had survived, all they had lost, and all they were determined never to lose again. Every heartbeat in that moment, every shared breath, was an affirmation. They had survived the darkness, and they would endure together. Yet the mansion, steeped in history, in echoes of power and betrayal, reminded them subtly that the world beyond its walls remained. A faint rumble of distant thunder sounded through the city, soft, almost teasing, as if the universe itself acknowledged that while this chapter had closed, the story, the legacy, was far from over. Roman's gaze flicked to the window, then back to the cradle, noting the tiny fingers curling instinctively around the golden key. It was a reminder, both fragile and potent, that the past would always linger, that shadows never fully disappear, but that hope, love, and family could redefine everything. Roman sat beside the cradle, holding the baby gently, feeling the steady rhythm of life against his chest, Julia beside him, the morning light washing over them. He whispered promises, quiet but fierce. "I will protect you, always. No one will take you from me, not ever." Julia leaned into him, tears streaming freely now, her head resting against his shoulder, soft sighs punctuating the silence. They shared a rare, fragile serenity, a moment of pure connection after months of chaos, loss, and blood. And in that fragile stillness, the camera would pan down to the cradle, tiny fingers closing around the golden key, a quiet, determined grasp that hinted at potential, at growth, at a legacy that would continue beyond the shadows of the past. Thunder rumbled faintly outside, soft but omnipresent, a reminder that life, like storms, was never entirely predictable, never entirely controlled. Yet within the mansion, in that quiet moment of love and survival, Roman, Julia, and their child were whole, ready to face whatever came next, together. The story of power, betrayal, and blood had reached a conclusion, but the legacy, the choices, the love, and the family that had emerged from the darkness would continue. A living testament that even in the shadows of empires and sins, redemption, hope, and love could endure. Roman's eyes lingered on his son, golden key resting beside him, and he whispered once more, barely audible, yet carrying all the weight of the past and promise of the future. "This is ours, and it begins now." If this story gave you chills, tears, or kept you at the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Join us because the next story will take you even deeper into love, betrayal, and secrets that will stay with you forever.